Today we're really thinking big. It's simply marvelous to work on a great big thing, like a bedspread, instead of a tiny eyeglass case that may get put in your pocketbook and forgotten. This is a bedspread in squares, and one of the things about putting a huge galumphing thing into your workbox and trying to take it on a plane or in a car with you is that it is huge, and you can't really carry it around. So a bedspread in squares that you can put onto a piece of velvet, as I did, or else you could join the pieces together like a patchwork, is really a pretty good idea. I shouldn't say this, but I suppose if you really got stuck after you've done the first two, you could make them into pillows, and then you could really put the rest away in your bottom drawer to await your dotage. But my favorite patterns here, these were all taken from Botanical prints, are the rose and the poppy down here. The rose has turkey work in the middle and little French knots for stamens. And then there's the poppy, which has a nice little spider's web in the middle and some bullion knots around it. I reserved the lightest designs of those 18th century flower patterns for the pillow. And my favorites here are the violet. And then here's the strawberry plant. It's rather nice because it's got all its roots and one tiny strawberry broken off down in the corner. But a really grand project that absolutely shows your expertise is a chair. And this one has an all-over design, which I really adapted from those 17th century prints. This type of thing. This is eventually was going to be a pocket in the 17th century. It's a printed fabric, perhaps hand-painted from India. And the thing about it is, it's so lovely because you can do a pattern on a chair like this, and it doesn't really matter if one of the leaves or a bit of the stem is cut off, because it has an overall flow. And then you can use all sorts of exciting stitches and make it almost like a sampler, because the overall strong sweeping lines of the stems hold the whole thing together, and it doesn't become too busy or cluttered. Well, the first thing you have to do when you're designing a chair for yourself is to get the man who's going to upholster it for you to make a pattern, because upholsterers are simply awful. They're apt to say, well, I had to cut into the design because you didn't make it, you made it much too big, or else if you have made it quite small, you think you've made it able to be fitted, the man says, oh dear, I can't possibly make that into a chair. You'll just have to throw it away or make a pair of pillows. So get your pattern. It's called a template. Get him to cut it exactly to the right size, and then there'll be no grumbling afterwards, and pin it into shape, into place, and take a piece of chalk and mark the outline of your design, the place where the embroidery really should end. You can do it quite roughly with a piece of chalk, and then just do those scrolling stems. Draw them so that they flow, but they can really meander all over the place. Don't let it get too centralized, and then put a few circles so that when you have the finished thing, you'll know exactly where each flower is going to be, and it'll give you some idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Take it off then, and put a piece of tracing paper on top of it, and finish drawing it putting all the details of the flowers in, and here you can use your chintz as a guide and just draw them quite roughly and see whether you like it when you put it into position on the chair. If you don't, throw it all away and start over again and get some artistic friend to help you. But it doesn't really take too much doing because the stems, as I said, give you that overall feeling, and it's so much easier with that type of pattern. Now, the next step, of course, is to choose your fabric. And here's linen twill, which I think is awfully good. It's a very firm, hard-wearing fabric. It wears like iron because it's got a diagonal weave. So it's quite smooth-looking, too, which is good for that type of a chair, which should look rather delicate. Then all you have to do is to transfer your pattern to the material with embroidery carbon, and then you're all ready to start. Except, of course, you have to choose your colors. And I chose all sorts of blues and greens as a predominating color, but because I thought it might have to be moved into any room, I added a few apricots and golds so that it would be able to be used almost anywhere. That's something to think about when you're creating an heirloom. But it would look perfectly lovely, I think, in shades of rust and pink and reds, or maybe all in blues and golds. However, I started with green stems and green leaves in a really traditional manner. So put your stems in first because you know that they're going to be in your predominating color. And what stitch is best to use for the stems? Well, naturally, stem stitch. It's a very simple stitch. You go down and you come up and go down and come up into the back of your last stitch. Pull it very tightly, and then you get a nice clear hole, and you can really feel your way through it. Hold your thread to the same side of the needle each time. You can always check if somebody's doing stem stitch correctly by looking on the wrong side. And if you see a little line of back stitches, you know it's going to be all right, because that gives you a very nice ropey effect. Then, when you do the main stems first, start at the beginning of one of the smaller stems and bring it down so that they join smoothly, because in nature you never get a little side shoot coming off the main branch backwards. It always grows forwards. So therefore, you want to bring your stitches close together and let them run side by side for a couple of stitches, and you'll get a nice smooth join. You see, I'm doing this stem stitch by stabbing it up and down in the frame, one hand above and one below. And then I can just leave my threads hanging on the top. So it is a good idea, I think, to get a frame to work on with a stand, because then you can sit on it like this, and then you can get it really, really tight. You have to alter the adjustable screw first, and then push it firmly over, using all your muscles. You can't alter that screw once it's in tension like this. So if you want to take it off, you have to push with your thumbs, and then alter the screw if necessary, and then push it down again. Pushing it very hard like that and pulling on the linen at the same time makes it just like a drum. That's not even making the right noise, so I'm going to do it a little bit more. That's better. Well, the next stitch that I want to show you as one of the good ones to do is buttonhole. Most people know how to do buttonhole stitch, but it's rather nice to do it radiating into the center of a circle. Go down in the center and come up on the edge, holding the loop and come up inside the loop with your needle. Keep on going down into the same hole. Pull the thread very firmly away from you, away from the center, so that you get those loops lying quite flat. Sometimes, if you don't pull them firmly towards the outside, they'll fall in like that, and they won't be as smooth as you'd like them to be. Another lovely stitch that I just adore because it covers the ground with great speed and rapidity is laid work. And laid work is done by coming up right beside where you just went down. Go down across the shape, come up right beside it, so you have practically no stitching showing on the wrong side. That makes it awfully flat. Really, that's essential to do in a frame, you can see, because your stitches have to be so nice and flat. But you can't leave it like that because it would get all ruffled up when somebody sat on the chair. They might catch a zipper in it or something awful. So put a little network of crisscross lines on top of it. Start in the center. That's always a good thing to do when you're doing a geometric sort of stitch like this, because then you get to the awkward corners at the end. Keep crossing, and don't worry if they don't look absolutely perfectly in order, because nobody's going to come up to your chair and say, well, your squares are 1/100th of a millimeter out of true. So don't measure, but just practice gauging distances with your eye and cover the whole surface with those little diamonds. And then you have to hold them flat in their turn with a little contrasting colored stitch. I'm using deep blue and then pale blue for the crisscross and then dark purple for the tie-down stitch. And those stitches are important too because they make a very pretty effect, as you see over here. Here's the finished design in laid work on the chair with little tiny satin stitch in the stamens, and then here's fishbone stitch, that lovely stitch that makes a little vein in the middle. And it's quite easy to do, even though it looks as though it's done in several stages. Here's the finished buttonhole stitch flower, and over here are bullion knots, all done in a long, wormy sort of a bud that trails away there. Chain stitch is another that's awfully simple, but it's rather nice with a dark outline and light in the center. And you can just go on adding stitches as you feel inclined and really make a sampler. You never get bored because you say, I'll just finish this little outline before I go to bed, and before you know it, you've done about 3 or 4 flowers. I was just going to outline that flower with the dark purple, and it's time to leave. I'll never get this companion one finished. I think I'll take it with me. See you soon.